If you could please take your seats. Good evening. Good evening in the back. Hi, I'm Brian Selmeski. I'm the Chief of Staff of Fairmont State University. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the second to last, or for you fancy people, the penultimate installation of the Presidential Speaker Series for this academic year. Before I turn this over to our interim dean of the College of Liberal Arts, let me say that the ultimate, also known as the last, presidential speaker will occur on April 28th. That will be West Virginia Secretary of Tourism, Chelsea Ruby. We're also going to test all of your memories. We're going to move the location from here, the conference rooms, to the Wallman Hall Theater. So there will be a quiz at the end of tonight. For those of you who have not joined us here before, let me give you a quick overview of the way we run these. We're going to have our introduction, and then our guest tonight will speak for about 20 or 30 minutes. After that, she will join our president, Dr. Mike Davis, on stage for what we call a fireside chat. He'll ask a series of questions that help connect some of tonight's conversation with things that are going on campus, issues that we're discussing elsewhere. Then we'll open it up to Q&A. After that, the really fun part, we'll have a reception outside in the hall. We'll reset this room, and then, to keep everybody on your toes, we'll come back in and we'll actually do what we're going to hear about tonight, or part of what we'll hear about tonight, a square dance. So, remember, there's a quiz at the end. With that said, let me turn the mic over to Dr. Jim Matthews, our interim dean of the College of Liberal Arts.
Thank you, Brian. It is a really great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. Annick Odom is a Belgian Appalachian musician, composer, storyteller, square dance caller, and cranky maker. Now, if you don't know what that is, you will before tonight is over. Born and raised in Morgantown, West Virginia, Annick spent over a decade living and performing in Michigan, the Netherlands, and Belgium, and holds a Master of Music from the Royal Conservatory of The Hague. Her music reaches across genres, from folk string bands to electroacoustic collaborations to experimental chamber music. Annick is deeply committed to community-centered arts practice, ranging from collaborative cranky productions to traditional storytelling to inclusive community dance traditions, like you'll see after her talk tonight. Now, I'm not going to go into her long list of projects, but I will say she's going to have a new album, Linen of Words, out on April 14th, so 1 week from today. We are lucky to have her as a 2025-26 Fairmont State Artist in Residence, Annick Odom.
Thank you. So I was asked to speak, but I'm mostly a bass player, so I thought I would start off with a song that is from here in West Virginia and that I learned a couple years ago now. And I also thought I would start off the speech with some participatory singing. So before you can chicken out and run away, this song is called Camp a Little While in the Wilderness. And the words are really easy. It's, I'll camp a little while in the wilderness. Let me hear it. I'll camp a little while in the wilderness, in the wilderness, in the wilderness. In the wilderness, in the wilderness. I'll camp a little while in the wilderness. I'll camp a little while in the wilderness. And we'll all journey home. And we'll all journey home. And then the next part is we'll all journey home, we'll all journey home, blah, 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 we'll all journey home. So those are the words. Now, the way I learned this song, and the way I've learned most folk music, there's not really any teaching that happens. You kind of just start and you join in, and at some point, maybe it gets a bit better. So I'd like you to just join in. I'll do the beginning part, and the more confident you are, the better it is. I've learned that from playing music. So we'll camp a little while in the wilderness. Can you sing that? We'll camp a little while in the wilderness, in the wilderness, in the wilderness. In the wilderness, in the wilderness. And see if you can get as nasal of a sound as you can. Anything you learned in church maybe, but also in choir class, kind of throw a little bit out the window. Nasal, bright, you want it to be so loud that I can hear each of your voices, but they also are blending kind of in the middle of the room. So We'll camp a little while in the wilderness, in the wilderness, in the wilderness. We'll camp a little while in the wilderness, and we'll all journey home. You guys are good fakers. Let's try it again. We'll camp a little while in the wilderness, in the wilderness, in the wilderness. We'll camp a little while in the wilderness, and we'll all journey home. This is my part. We'll all journey home. We'll all journey home. We'll camp a little while in the wilderness, and we'll all journey home. Let's try that. We'll all journey home. We'll all journey home. We'll camp a little while in the wilderness, and we'll all journey home. And the cool thing about this song is those are all the words, and then I sub out different family members. So can I hear a family member? Like, what's a member of the family, someone's name? Like a kind of type of family member. Sister. Oh, sisters, are we ready? Ready, oh, ready. Oh, sisters, are we ready? And we'll all journey home. We'll all journey home. We'll all journey home. We'll camp a little while in the wilderness, and we'll all journey home. Let's do one more family member. Grandma. Oh, grandmas, are we ready? Ready, oh, ready. Oh, grandmas, are we ready? And we'll all journey home. We'll all journey home. We'll all journey home. We'll camp a little while in the wilderness, and we'll all journey home. We'll all journey home. We'll all journey home. We'll camp a little while in the wilderness, and we'll all journey home. Thanks. Thank you. You guys were great. I can't wait to see the square dancing. So I want to say thank you to Lydia Warren and to Jim Matthews, along with Ellie and Haley at the Folklife Center. They have been hosting me this year as artists in residence, and it's been really cool to get to know them and to get to know the archives. And I also want to thank President Mike Davis for having me on the speaker series, for letting me sing at the speaker series and do what I'm about to do. So I've been getting asked a lot about what crankies are this year. This is a cranky. I've tried to explain it as a storytelling machine or as a moving panorama, which is what it used to be called. But when I do that, I keep getting kind of blank stares. So I decided that as my speech, I was going to make a cranky so that everyone would know what it is. So this is geared especially towards students, but I hope that you'll enjoy. I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself and about my work and how I ended up here. So I grew up in West Virginia, in Morgantown, actually. And when I was little, I really loved the bass and the clarinet. I didn't really know about traditional music. I think that was partly because what was surrounding me was classical music. And I'm also half Belgian, so we spent a lot of time traveling back and forth to Belgium in the summers. And for some reason, there was a lot of pressure growing up. Maybe it was mostly coming from me, but I think also from folks who weren't from West Virginia, who said that I needed to dream big, and that dreaming big meant leaving, that being successful meant leaving. So I didn't always know that I was going to come back to this place or to the folk traditions here. I got more and more serious about music, and so I moved away, like I was supposed to do, and I went to Michigan. And when I was in Michigan, I remember thinking, it's so flat here. The sky is so big. And I remember telling a friend, I was trying to explain to them what it felt like in Michigan compared to in West Virginia. In West Virginia, I felt so safe, I realized. And I didn't really know until I left. But in Michigan, I kind of felt like there might be an eagle at any point that would just swoop down and grab me and pull me away. And I thought to myself, maybe West Virginia actually had some pretty cool stuff going on. The mountains were pretty cool. I spent a lot of time focusing on music, though. I was in school studying clarinet and bass, and I really was enjoying myself. For me, at the time, playing in an orchestra with a full section of bassoonists rather than saxophone players was already pretty cool and special. In my band, there had not been a full ensemble, and the band director in high school had actually arranged everything, so which is also cool. But anyway, I spent some time getting to know classical music. But as I went on, I started to kind of feel like I was on a bit of a tightrope. I was learning a lot, and I was developing my technique, but I also think that I forgot some of what I loved about music. The playfulness, the freedom, the confidence that I'd had before I entered school. In many ways, that was great for me. I improved a lot, and I think a lot of people might say that you need to build technique before you can experiment fully. So there I was, focused on getting things right, playing the notes correctly, practicing, refining, interpreting. And I was interpreting in the way I was supposed to. My teachers told me how to play the music, and I played it as best as I could. I was playing the notes correctly, if I could, and feeling a lot of shame and stress when I couldn't. And, for the most part, I was not thinking critically or using my own imagination or creativity. For the most part, that's not what a classical degree is meant to do. It's meant to prepare me to be a highly specialized technician and an interpreter. And so I was starting to think in school, maybe I'm not that interested in this being my main job. And in classical music especially, the roles of creation and interpretation are quite divided. Up until going to university, I didn't really know any living composers. At least, if I did, I didn't know them. Looking back now, probably my band director had done some composing or arranging at least. And I know actually now that my bass professor at the time in high school was also a composer. But when I got to Michigan, I didn't know all of that. And so when I got to school, the closest that I could get to creating music was by taking an improvisation class and performing music by student composers, which often involved a pretty collaborative workshopping process. And both improvising and playing music was really freeing, to improvise and to play new music with people in the room who had just created that music. It was cool because I wasn't just following rules from the past, but I was also able to feel like I was part of that decision-making process. But still, the degree I was doing, that was not the goal. So for the most part, I was really focused on learning to play clarinet and the bass. And around graduation, people started asking me that dreaded question that maybe some of you are getting who are students in the room. So, what's next? Or even more stressful for me, are you going to be a professional musician? And I know it was often just asked out of curiosity. And because everyone knows that performing music or being an artist is pretty difficult in this country. So the question stressed me out, but I did want to be a professional musician. And I also wasn't really sure how I would get there, unless I kept working hard, auditioning for the few orchestral positions, and maybe being lucky enough and good enough to get a spot. It felt at the time, I remember when I was in school, like there was this really strong barrier between being a real musician and being an amateur. Anyways, There was no way I was going to make it into a really big orchestra just after undergrad. I wasn't sure I wanted to be in one, and I was a little burned out after school. So after I graduated, I took a part-time job in grassroots marketing at an arts organization. And around this time, I was teaching group violin classes in Flint, Michigan. I was performing in a couple of orchestras, and I was in a band. And surprisingly, when I got to this arts organization, I was meeting all of these people who were really good at their day jobs and who also wrote by night and were working on a novel, or spent their lunch breaks in the cellar practicing the violin. And I realized that maybe what I'd been told wasn't totally true. Having a day job didn't mean you were failing as an artist. I'd been taught that I needed to compete and that I was less if I wasn't first chair in orchestra. But I learned from these coworkers that I didn't need to define my identity or my success as an artist by my day job. As an artist, it was likely, actually, that I would always have many streams of income: teaching, performing, composing, organizing, and probably part-time or sometimes even full-time non-arts work. And I think that I had been told that in school with something called a portfolio career, but it hadn't really stuck until I met other people who were doing the same thing. And it had always felt before that if you didn't make it into the best orchestra, you had failed. But I think that it doesn't mean that you don't take your work seriously if you're not making all of your income from that. I realize that, at least in large part, or at least how I think about it, professionalism is about consistency, it's about care, it's about follow-through and depth of engagement. I also realized that all of my professors in school weren't full-time musicians. They had teaching jobs, and even most of the orchestral musicians that I looked up to weren't making music all of the time. Really, most artists I know, especially those coming from outside of classical music, are supported by something else: a job, a partner, family, grants, institutions, teaching, or community support. And with the exception of that very top-level orchestral musician, most performers have to do something, or many other things, to make it as a musician. So even if they're mostly performing, they usually need to organize or market their performances, for instance. And so I started to think about how I could sustainably be an artist. Instead of asking myself, am I enough? Did I make it yet? Am I a real professional musician? I started to ask myself, which parts of music bring me joy? What parts of my work need to make money? What parts of my work do I not want to make money? What do I want to protect from monetization? What kind of life do I want to support? And so I realized after 2 years of being out of school, I had energy to learn again. And I was ready to jump back in. I still loved classical music, and I especially wanted to work with composers, and I wanted to play new music. I felt I wasn't done learning yet, and so I moved to the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, it was kind of a culture shock. I realized that some countries fund their arts way better than here. I realized that in some countries, classical music really still felt alive. When I would play at concerts, the halls were filled. Young people were at the concerts. And I learned so much there about classical music and contemporary music specifically. I became even more connected to the composition and improvisation students and those studying electronic music, even though I was still technically studying classical music. And during those studies, or maybe just after, I went to study for a summer at an experimental new music festival in Darmstadt, Germany. And one of the classes there was a mini course on artists' interests in cooking. In case you didn't know, you should really check out Dali's experimental cookbook, or John Cage's macrobiotic cookbook. And actually, speaking of artists with portfolio careers, John Cage earned a lot of money with mushroom identification before he was making a living as a composer. So in this class, it was taught by a Norwegian composer named Lars Peter Hagen, and he said something that really stayed with me. He said, what if we thought about music as the same way that we think about cooking, the same way that we think about cooking a local dish? And he probably meant it in a bit of a different way than I took it, but I started to think about what it would look like if the music I created and performed wasn't the most famous music or the most complicated music. It would be like a freshly picked tomato, right from my garden, maybe with a family recipe. It was something that could be grown with care, something that was meant to be shared and brought to others with joy, something specific, something connected to me and to the place where I'd found it. And he certainly was not talking about folk music. He was talking about experimental noise music. But for me, something really clicked. Living in the Netherlands, I had been feeling quite homesick for a while, and in my spare time, I'd already started to learn more American old-time fiddle tunes, and I'd even started to call community square dances in the Netherlands. I actually ended up meeting a bunch of Dutch, French, British, and Belgian musicians over the next couple of years who were extremely interested in American folk music, specifically old-time, specifically from West Virginia. And I think meeting people from that far away who were so in love with West Virginia and would do nothing, they would have loved to come live here, to get to meet some of the fiddlers that I didn't even know existed yet. It made me really interested in going back to explore. So I went the next summer, and I went to a place that some of you in the audience will know. I went to Augusta. Augusta is in Elkins, and it's a traditional heritage center. And there, I just kind of fell in love with old-time music. I really enjoyed being a complete beginner and a student again, and it gave me a lot of permission to be non-exceptional in a way that I think once you start calling yourself a professional musician, the last thing you're supposed to do is show up and not know how to play the thing that happens, especially as a classical musician. And so I started listening to more and more Appalachian music, to old time. I started listening to ballads that were passed down for generations. I was in the Netherlands looking up archives in West Virginia, including the Fairmont State Archives, but also WVU and Augusta's archives, and listening to these field recordings that were like sounds, kind of like the Crankies making. And then inside of it, there would be these little stories that people would tell right before they would start singing or right before they would start playing a fiddle tune. And I almost found that more interesting than the fiddle tunes themselves. And I think as a classical musician, it was so completely different from what I had learned to value. And, there was no stage. Many wrong notes might be played. Many words might be forgotten. People were having fun and hanging out with their families performing. And so I started to come back to West Virginia each summer, and I learned what I could. And I would bring back more and more material from different archives to work on over the next year in the Netherlands and in Belgium. And then finally I decided, this doesn't make a lot of sense. It's time to move back to the US. And so I think through working with kind, welcoming musicians, I started to make my way into this world. And I started to understand that many of the artists who play folk music are extremely serious about this music, even if it isn't how they make much, if any, money, and that some made the decision to keep working primarily at being musicians, but most had other jobs. And I also realized, these music and these traditions can also be mine, and I can also add to them. We often think of tradition, I think, as something that's fixed, something that we're supposed to slot into, something we preserve, or something we're, born into. And especially as someone whose family isn't originally from West Virginia, I didn't think I would ever feel this connected to West Virginian folk music. But actually, by learning so many of these traditions, I've learned that it all came from somewhere. It didn't just pop up in West Virginia, you know? And so it was refreshing to realize that being part of a tradition, and I mean any tradition, also classical music, doesn't require you to be the best or even to try to be the best. And that tradition isn't a museum, it's a conversation. And through learning about traditional music from West Virginia, I think I've actually also become a better classical musician. I've also become definitely a more creative musician. I think in both classical music and folk music, I've realized that there are spaces that I belong, and also that I can create my own spaces. I've found that garden that I'm interested in drawing from in my own art, at least for now. So I still love classical music. I still play the bass and clarinet. I compose, I teach, I play in a couple of bands, I improvise, I call square dances, and I make crankies. And that's a lot. I really love doing all of these things and more, and for me, most of them feel really interconnected. And I do think I have a particular propensity for being really busy and enjoying that. And so I don't approach all of these interests with the same rigor, but over time, my interest and the amount of effort that I'm putting into each of these different activities has shifted, and sometimes I add a new skill. And a musician friend of mine once described this in a way that I really liked. He said, some people have just a few interests. They maybe think of them as buckets, and they fill those buckets really quickly. They might become specialists in their field, soloists or experts in some really specialized area. They might become your professor one day. And on the other hand, some people may have a ton of buckets, and it may take them a lot longer to fill them. If you're someone like me, who has a lot of buckets to fill, at first you might feel like you're not excelling at anything. And it might be good, probably, to start with not too many buckets. It might be good to start with bass and clarinet, for instance, and to keep those as your main focus for a little bit. But even then, sometimes, you might feel like you're learning more slowly than others. But if you're working hard and passionate and continue over time, those buckets will fill, some more quickly than others, and some might be forgotten after a little while or even become full. Through this process, I think if you have a lot of different buckets, a lot of different interests, you become someone who can connect things, someone who brings together ideas, people, forms. And if you have more buckets, you might also not be so stressed when someone else shows up with the same skills as you, because what's the likelihood of someone coming and playing the bass and bringing a cranky and singing a song with you all? So you never know. You might not be the very best in the world at any one thing, but you can create something that only you can make, and I think that's still very valuable. And the album that Dr. Matthews brought up, it's coming out on April 14th, and I think it shows a lot of those musical worlds, a lot of those buckets that I've been living in. There's free improvisation, jazz, classical, electronic music, folk. I even composed some of my own pieces. And I think in that specific process, having all of these skill sets, I didn't play any jazz on the album, but through playing a little bit of jazz, I met people that I could ask to join my project who were amazing jazz players. Maybe they were the specialized folks who just basically had one bucket they really spent all of their time on. So if there's a point to my talk, I'd say explore something you're interested in. Explore something that you might not be good at. Explore something you might never be good at. Maybe that will be drawing hands holding tomatoes. Maybe that will be square dancing, or maybe it will be making a cranky. And maybe you'll decide some of those skills are just hobbies and that you care about them, but you can laugh at yourself or maybe with others. Maybe if you're making art, you'll take it really seriously. And how seriously you take it is up to you, not how someone else defines you. I think also that there's enough art to go around for everyone, and that everyone can be a musician or an artist if they'd like to be. If you work hard and you laugh at yourself a little, you'll probably have much more fun as you create your own special mix of you and what you have to offer. And wherever you're living right now, the people you know right now, together you have so many resources. You can look in your own garden to find your ingredients, create your own recipe, maybe even several. I'd like to stop with one piece that I wrote, that's a piece for bass. And I learned it from Phyllis Marks. She was a ballad singer. And so I would say it kind of combines some of these different buckets. One thing I've really loved about traditional music is it tells a story. And sometimes there's sounds that you can really imagine something in, or maybe make some weird noises that you might otherwise not get to play. So this one is called Get Up and Bar the Door. And it's about two folks who are having a little bit of an argument, and neither one really wants to resolve the issue. So. Oh, the wind blew high, the wind blew low. It blew all over the floor. When John Jones said to Jane, his wife, "Get up and bar the door." "Oh, I have worked so hard," said he. "I'm sure I can't do more. Get up, my darling wife. Get up and bar the door." "Oh, I have worked so hard," said she. "I've washed and scrubbed the floor. Get up, you lazy man. Get up and bar the door." So the two of them, they made a pact, a solemn vow they swore, that the very first one to say a word would have to bar the door. Well, the wind blew high, the wind blew low. It blew all over the floor, but neither one would say a word for barring of the door. 3 robbers came along that way. They came across the moor. They saw light, they walked right in, right through the open door. "Oh, who's the good man of this house? Is he rich or is he poor?" Neither one would say a word for barring of the door. So they ate their bread, they drank their ale. They said, "Come, give us more." Neither one would say a word for barring of the door. "Oh, I'll pull the old man's beard," said one. "I'll beat him till he's sore." Neither one would say a word for barring of the door. "Well, I'll kiss the old man's wife," said one. "Of her I would adore." Then the old man shook his fist and he gave a mighty roar. "Oh, you'll not kiss my wife," said he. "I'll throw you on the floor." Said Jane, "Now John, you spoke a word. Get up and bar the door." Said Jane, "Now John, you spoke a word. Get up and bar the door. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Well, that was great. Thank you for being here. As we've talked over the last couple of days, and I was formulating questions, it was interesting how much of it showed up in your story. And one of the things that I was sort of thinking about when you were talking last night and at lunch today is I sort of thought about you. You're sort of a dabbler, right? When you see something that's interesting, you're like, let me pull on some of those strings. And I thought it was really interesting talking about how you then categorize those, right? This is something you do for you. This is something you do for money, and then how those buckets work. So talk about the value of approaching life that way and being able to sort of say, that seems interesting to me, let me see what's there.
Yeah, I think kind of like I was talking about, there's some fields in my mind at least that it's only gonna work if you're pretty focused on that. But I think as a musician, especially if you're trying to be in a community, it can be so useful to just be kind of okay at playing guitar, and maybe you're at a jam and someone needs a guitar, and you're like, okay, I can play those 3 chords. I'm not gonna be the best, but I'm the person you need right now.
Right.
And so I think for me, I've been really interested, mostly within the realm of music, but even as a dabbling visual artist, I would by no means say that this should be hung up in a gallery, but for me, it's really been a way of, one, kind of getting out of my head when I'm getting a little bit stressed out about the thing that I actually take really seriously, and getting some new inspiration, meeting new people, and also kind of being of use or being a part of a community.
Yeah, I think it's a really important lesson for our students, because I think from an early age we start asking people, what are you going to be when you grow up? Right, and we assume that the jobs that exist now are the jobs that are always going to exist, and the jobs you see are the only jobs you can do. And I think one of the things that's always stopped me from doing art or doing music is I'm like, well, I'm not going to be very good at it. And today earlier you were like, you don't even have to be good at it.
No.
Right, being bad at it's okay if it's for you or if you fill a need or that sort of thing. And I think that part is often really hard to express to people.
And I think also I've been feeling more and more strongly that I would rather see 100 pieces of bad art made by a human than made by a robot.
Yeah.
So I think that's given me so much more, I think actually AI has given me so much courage to be terrible at what I do.
Absolutely. Yeah, I saw this thing on social media where it was like, AI has not delivered anything I wanted, right? AI is doing art and music for me where I wanted to do my laundry and stuff like that. But one of the things we talk a lot about on campus is how do we start to create some jobs that are AI proof? And I think the engagement you see in a room like this really shows that the value of art is that AI proof piece, right? Universities cut art and music and theater and all those kind of things when those are really the things that are bringing us together. Can you talk a little bit about
I think, I wonder sometimes, I guess, there are definitely universities that like WVU and others who have cut a lot of funding from a lot of programs that I would deem really, really special and really important. And I think that one thing that I found really, really weird about this whole argument about AI music was, you don't have to practice. And for me, maybe I've been brainwashed, but I love practicing. That's the whole reason, in a way, that I make art. It's getting to spend that time alone, focused, improving, and to really be proud looking back at what I've accomplished. And so I think even for folks who aren't doing a major in that degree, it's so important to have access to it and to have professors who are really skilled in those areas. To have ensembles. I think you learn so much from playing in a band or playing in an orchestra. I know I talked a lot about all the things I didn't like about classical music, but I think I gained so much from playing, in high school band or orchestra and in the university setting, but also as a professional musician. And so, I think that there are some things that are not replaceable, and I think I've noticed that as AI has become more popular, which I think there are reasons to use AI for sure, but I think in music, yeah, it's like, I want it to do my laundry. I don't want it to play my bass for me. So
I think, too, and I was thinking about this when we were talking about it at lunch, it's a question of the product versus the process, right? And I think there are certain things that we want the product to matter the most, right? If you're a surgeon,
I would like
the end outcome you want it to be as perfect as possible. Whereas I think often the journey of creating art or even the experience of learning on a college campus, it's supposed to be messy. We talked about this, right?
Yeah.
It's supposed to be messy. It's supposed to be something you're working through. And maybe you could tell the story you were telling at lunch about the sort of jam session you were talking about, where people show up and they want to watch, and you're like, well, no, you should really participate. I think that was a really interesting sort of example of that, why that process matters.
Oh yeah, one thing that for me as a classical musician was really a shift when I started going to old time jams, and maybe some of the musicians in the room will recognize it, is that you won't, if you're not the one who calls the tune, you might actually never fully at the jam understand what's going on the entire tune. And the goal is you're trying to pick it up and you're trying to support the other person who calls it. But I'm looking at the band right now who's going to play. Maybe you've had this experience. But I think it's made me playing old time and playing in jam settings where you aren't given sheet music before, where you're not able to prepare in the same way, has really made me feel more flexible as a musician. It's improved my musicianship. It's improved my ear as a classical musician. But it's also kind of helped me recognize that the process of being together and of taking interest in each other, even if it's not the thing I do best, being like, okay, this person knows this tune, I'm going to try and support that and make that happen as well. That's been something I've gained a lot from playing in old time. And I think it's also made old time feel pretty welcoming as a art form and as a community tradition, because I think people of all different levels can join in and you can kind of slowly learn through being in a group, which in orchestra, I think I would be a lot more annoyed if someone next to me didn't know what they were doing, depending on what kind of ensemble it was.
Yeah, I think we're so terrified of getting it wrong, right? That we don't try new things often. And I think a lot of the things you're talking about are things where getting it wrong is part of the purpose, right? You're supposed to try stuff out. You're supposed to miss some of your shots, that sort of thing. And I think that part's really important. And I think it's often scary for people. It's why people don't try new things, because they're like, well, I couldn't do that, or I couldn't do that. Yeah. And nobody can when they first pick it up. So it's how you figure things out.
Yeah. I was taking a songwriter class a couple years ago with a really cool songwriter, Margaret Glaspie, and she was trying to break down how she writes songs, and someone was asking her, like, do you start with the voice, or do you start with the chords, or do you start with the words? She was like, I just do it all at once. Like, I don't have time for that. I'm just gonna try and mess around, and obviously that leads to a very specific kind of product, but I think she had kind of the same mentality as me of thinking, I want this thing, and the only way I'm going to get better at it is if I just try it.
Right.
It's going to be bad for a while, and maybe you don't have to show it publicly when it's bad, but I think if you get into that mindset, you're never going to think you're good enough to show it.
Yeah. And neither will anyone else, right? If you don't show the parts that are flawed publicly, then how do other people ever know where you started or where you came from, right? Right. I mean, if you only if you only see people's highlight reels, how do you ever know the struggles and things like that? And I think it's really important to sort of talk those things out and show those things. Last question I'm going to ask you before we turn to the audience. I've got so many I could ask you, but I'm going to let the audience have a chance to. I wanted you to talk a little bit more about sort of the experience of coming home. Last night you described it as sort of a boomerang, right? You left and you came back to West Virginia, and I think you talked a little bit about it. You had this new appreciation for West Virginia because you met people who also wanted to talk about it, and maybe you could talk some more about that.
Yeah, we were talking last night at dinner a bit about how maybe it's also a generational thing, but I feel like when I was growing up, really it felt, especially given my interests, it felt like I needed to be in a big city and I needed to not be in West Virginia to succeed. And I think, one, my interests shifted, but also I realized that being back in West Virginia gave me access to a lot of things that I really had not known about or had not valued at the time. Being so close to just some of the best musicians, hands down, in the world who play old time, has been so cool. And I think it unfortunately sometimes takes someone else who is not from that area to make you realize, oh wow, actually that was really cool, or I knew them, or I hang out with them sometimes. But I feel like in a way it took me leaving to kind of want to come back. I think if I had felt stuck here, I maybe would have never gained that appreciation. It kind of took a little bit of homesickness, and it took a little bit of trying out other things to realize that I really liked getting to go walk in the woods. And I don't know, if anyone's ever been in the Netherlands, I was really weirded out. There's wonderful things in the Netherlands, but if you go to a park there, it really feels like every tulip was placed with extreme care in each part, And so I realized by having these kinds of experiences that I would take a boulder in the middle of my way any day over a tulip that was artfully placed.
Right, life's supposed to be messy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we've got, I think Gavin's got a microphone, so who in the audience has some questions?
Hi.
Hi, Fran.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Hey, talk a little bit about, I've actually kind of got two things I'd like to hear about. You mentioned Phyllis Marks, and a lot of people may not know who she is, but talk about mentorship in this journey and how people have mentored you. And also, what was it like to make that transition from music on the page versus music in the oral tradition?
Yeah. Okay, mentorship and music on the page. Mentorship, I think actually playing folk music helped me value the mentorship that I had actually been receiving as a classical musician too, in sometimes a much more formalized way at a university or something like that. But I think especially in the arts, I studied at a really large school. I was at University of Michigan, which has a huge number of students. And so the most seen I ever felt was in my one-on-one lessons with an instrumental professor. So I think playing folk music helped me kind of value that aspect of mentorship that maybe at times I had taken for granted. And it also helped me value sometimes the formalized nature of those mentorships. I think when I first started playing old time, at times, I think I really romanticized the really good parts of it, but what I sometimes didn't think about or started to realize slowly was that because it's so social and informal, it's kind of like a popular kids contest sometimes. And there's no competition that tells you I get first chair or I get to be in this band or I get to be in this thing. And so mentorship is really important. It's so important because it's how you get in the door, it's how you get into the jam. And so and not just mentorship, but also peer support. So I think for me, when I started getting into square dance calling, I did an official apprenticeship with Taylor Runner, who's from Morgantown, and I had already been calling before, but in addition to wanting to just get to know the calls from Morgantown area, I knew that having a mentor was going to help me get into the door and get to meet other callers and kind of be placed as someone who was learning and was legit in a way. So I think that exists in kind of every field, it seems like to me. Also with ballad singing, so I got connected to Jerry Milnes, who I actually did a fiddle apprenticeship with. He's in Elkins, and he connected me with Phyllis Marks. And she was a ballad singer who lived in the Glenville area. I met her in maybe it was 2015 or 2016, and she was in her 90s, and she had learned songs that were passed down from generations. And the thing about old-time mentorship is that a lot of the time it's not compensated either. Usually in classical music, you're taking lessons, you're paying for your time, which is inaccessible, but also you've paid for it, so you get it. I think with mentorship, you're really reliant on friendship and relationships, which can be good, but also I think can be hard to get into, and was a big part of why I wanted to move back to West Virginia. The second question about sheet music, I think some classical musicians have really great ears. They've learned playing Suzuki, for instance, and they initially learned off the page. But for me, I really felt tied to sheet music. When I used to have nightmares before juries in undergrad about having to memorize things because I had always learned them from sheet music, and as soon as you took that sheet music away, everything was gone. No matter how much I practiced, I would try all these different ways. And so it's actually pretty wild to me now that I probably know over 100 fiddle tunes and could play them right now. I would have never thought as a freshman that I could memorize anything like that. And I think that playing old time helped me kind of slowly build that, but it also helped me have a real relationship with the instrument and with the sounds I was making in a way that as a classical musician initially, I think I really was kind of connecting in this weird triangle shape. Like I was connecting to the music, and then the music was telling me what to do, rather than really feeling it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I'm wondering if you could explain. I'm going to guess that there are some students here who don't know what old time music is. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that, because the first time someone ever said old time to me as a genre, I just thought they meant like old people music, but that is not at all what you mean.
Yeah, thank you. So old time, for me, I kind of combined two things in that. I combined like really old traditional ballads that would have come from Scotland and England, but also mixed with a lot of other traditions along the way, including the traditions that enslaved people brought to the US and even indigenous folks. And the same would go for the fiddle music, which was primarily a dance music. You'll hear some of it tonight if you stay for the square dance. It's usually, there's a fiddle, there's a guitar, a banjo, sometimes a bass. Maybe sometimes a mandolin, but I would say that it's string band music. It's really, someone told me it was like trance music, but acoustic. I don't know if I totally agree with that, but I get what they were saying. Like, it's pretty repetitive, and I think for me, part of how I got into square dancing was because I was playing this fiddle music, and it was so repetitive, and I didn't really understand like what was the point. I mean, it's cool to play in a group, but I feel like when you hear it with dance, it makes so much sense. But so it's an old form before country, before bluegrass. It was a social kind of music. It wasn't necessarily performed initially. I guess also I should say in Fairmont, there's the hammer dulcimer and mountain dulcimer. I would also definitely include in some styles of, like old time. Does that answer your question, you think? People know what old time is kind of when I'm saying that? Cool.
I think one of the interesting conversations, too, we had at lunch was we were talking about, dances people know and that sort of thing, and square dance is really invitational, right? Mm-hmm. So it's okay if you don't know. I'm going to help walk you through that. And I think that's part of what I think makes it so social and becomes a space for people who might not know what's going on to be with people who really know what they're doing. And we talked a lot about that at lunch. I mean, you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the activities that I've grown really interested in as a musician have that element to them, where there's a mix of levels, a mix of generations, and some laughter going on. And so I think square dancing, what I've found really cool about it is that there's a role in the dance called a caller, and their whole job is to, in my mind, is to facilitate the dance, to make people feel welcome, to help people participate in whatever way they need help. And to, even during the actual dancing, call out what you're supposed to do. The other thing that I think is really cool about calling is that when you have that live human there, you can change the dance, and you can kind of mess around with the people who are dancing. If they're getting it, you could maybe make it a little harder, or you could switch something up. And so I think, again, kind of going back to why be a human and make music, or why be here in this body, like, to me, being a caller is a pretty cool thing to add to the mix, because you're making sure that people are welcome and know how to participate.
And I think that laughter part is really important, sort of like that it's okay to fumble it a little
Yeah.
bit. It's okay to get wrong. I remember like when I was a kid, my mom used to always try and get me to like get out and dance on the dance floor. And I was like, I'm not going to do that because people are going to laugh at me.
Yeah.
Right? And she would always say, well, but you're the one doing the dancing. Like, you actually get that joy out of dancing. Don't care about, I mean, as a kid, I was never going to do that. But I think it's been an interesting lesson is that I'm willing to try more things as I get older because at least I'm trying it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's really hard to convince people to take that first step. Well, I think once you do it, then you start to realize it's not as scary.
Yeah, I think I tend towards perfectionism. So actually doing a lot of these things that are messy for me is like my own little. I think I was talking to one of the students today, and we were calling it. It's a little bit like exposure therapy, and I'm putting myself into a situation that I probably am not really going to enjoy in some ways, like my type A personality. But that I know is, I think, for the greater good for me and also for the people who are in the room.
Maybe you're perfecting messiness.
Maybe that's what I think
Maybe
I'm
that's
aiming
what
for.
it is,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Other questions? There we go, one over here.
What if you talk a lot about the buckets, and I think that's a really strong thing, especially for the students here. And I am the mother of 3, in their 20s gentlemen. So they're not here today. I wish they were, but anyway, what did you find most surprising? I'm going to ask that first question. What did you find most surprising when you started to open your sphere out? What did you find, maybe whether it was about yourself or about something? And the second thing is at what point do you abandon a bucket?
Yeah, I feel, okay, so an example of a bucket I've abandoned, at least for now, is the banjo. I was like really into it, and I still am. I've decided that's a bucket for like 20 years down the line. And part of the reason is because I love it so much that I decided if I wouldn't be able to just do a little bit at a time. I would like become a banjo maniac. And so also I realized there were plenty of people who were playing the banjo, so I didn't need to put energy into that bucket right now. So I think it's kind of 2 things. It's like, am I enjoying it? Is it going to take over my life? Or maybe 3 things. Is it going to take over my life? Am I enjoying it? And is it needed? There are definitely buckets that I hate and that I'm still, like, as a musician, I am having to do a lot of marketing. I wish that I didn't have to, but that's the reality, and that's going to be basically, I think, my whole life. If I'm putting on events for myself or organizing things, that's a bucket that I'm going to have to be stuck with, whether or not I'm enjoying it. And I think the way I've tried to get around that is to create events that I'm really proud of and that I'm really excited to share about. Like the Morgantown Cranky Festival, May 30th through 31st, that Fran is going to perform at, some other folks. So anyway, there's my bucket for today. But yeah, I think those are some of the questions I ask myself. And I definitely think like bass has always been kind of one of the main things that I'm focused on. But for me, when I heard this friend like talk about the buckets, it just somehow it really made me feel better. I was like, okay, like I am improving, but obviously if I have this quantity of time and I'm splitting it between these buckets, I'm going to have to be okay with it going a little slower than for the other friend who is only focusing on the clarinet audition,
So what did you find surprising?
Yeah, surprising. I think how little you need to know to be able to connect to someone. Like if you read one book on a subject, I feel like you can already, chat with someone who has read a million books on the subject and have a really cool conversation that would be way different than if you hadn't heard of it before. Or, just playing a little bit of jazz, not very well. I've still met so many musicians that I really look up to. And by putting in that effort, I think I was able to communicate with them a little bit better what I wanted in my album, for instance. In a way that I think if I had just been focused as a classical musician, there would have been kind of a clash of cultures. And I think having multiple interests really helped me connect. Yeah.
I hear a book there. I hear something that's very valuable.
Cool.
That I think that would help other people. I hear a book there, so I.
That's not a bucket I've explored, but we'll see.
Maybe you can dabble in that area.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could probably raise my voice enough. Annick, first of all...
Wait, they won't get it on the live stream or the recording if you...
First of all, just so well done how you're able to bring
emotion through such a simple form. I mean, both songs, and particularly the one that you wrote, I'm here having this whole experience of emotion on something that at the first level feels like, oh, that's straightforward. But it's so full of story. I mean, I've read whole novels that are like this thick that basically engage in the story you're able to do with that song that you wrote. It's brilliant. So that's really fun. I was really engaged in the part of your cranky. I want to go back to the cranky.
Okay.
And the part that really got me was the building with the windows and the people. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that. And I'll just say, for me, one of the things that's hardest about full-time work is being indoors.
Yeah.
You know, look at the day like today, it was so gorgeous, and I'm sitting inside.
Yeah.
So could you talk, because there's something about how you presented that I feel like there's really something going on there.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just talking to Dr. Matthews before. That was the part of the cranky I was the most excited about. So I'm working to make crankies with students right now in a 8-week class. And part of the reason I made the cranky was because they are mostly quite interested in using watercolor. And I don't really use watercolor, and I know that watercolor takes a long time to dry compared to like gluing things on things, which is what I normally make crankies from. So I decided, instead of wasting classroom time to figure out if it would work, I would make one to see how the different kinds of paint that I had would work. And one thing I also wanted to try that I decided to do on the building was I put little film behind the black building and taped different pieces on each one, and wanted to just see if it would come through the Tyvek, which is a kind of plasticky scroll that a lot of people make crankies out of. So I'm glad that you like that part too. That was one of my favorite parts. But I think, yeah, I do a lot of like indoor activities. One thing I like about Old Time is it is for a large part outdoors. There's like festivals in the summer that people go to. I also think that's part of why I've started to do a lot of collaborative things, because even if you're indoors, it feels better when you're not just by yourself all the time. But I don't know, did that answer kind of some of your questions? I think also like playing folk music has made me value the outdoors a lot, just because I think a lot of the music was made before amplification, before things were so divided maybe between in and out. A lot of music I feel like was made on a porch. So, yeah.
I like that. A lot of music was made on a porch.
I think so.
I like that. Any final questions from the audience? Well, thank you very much for being here. I think it gives us a lot to think about as we are having conversations about, bringing back music and theater as majors, thinking about doing them in ways that are experimental and innovative, so that it's not you're doing a single thing, but you're doing something that, and we've talked about adding things like marketing to those majors, right? Contracting, right?
And
all
I think
those
it's
kind
so
of
important.
Pieces. Yeah.
And it's not something I learned about. I think most departments are really focused on classical music, and that's so cool, but I think it misses so many people who could lead really amazing lives as musicians. And I think especially like community music is an area that I feel like there's just so much that you can do as a musician, that you're equipped in a way to bring people together, that I think is just going to become more and more important. But especially as a young musician, I think having classes in those kinds of things would be so key to feeling like when you leave, how to take on the world.
It's a great way to answer your relatives when they say, what are you going to do with a music degree? What are you going to do with a theater degree? Right? You've got all those things built into that major. And then, our final speaker is going to be Secretary of Tourism, Chelsea Ruby. And if you think about how the arts and theater and music are such a huge part of tourism in West Virginia, what if we build all those pieces together in a way that makes sense for the state? And that's, I think, tourism is now the second largest industry in West Virginia. So if we can add that arts piece on top of it, I think it's really valuable.
Yeah, I think I would hope, like, with the connection to tourism, that there would still be a focus on process, too. Yeah. That's the part that I sometimes fear gets a little lost when the arts are wrapped into tourism, is that they only have value if they're bringing people in, and bringing people in maybe who aren't from the area. I think there's so much value to, like, having strong communities having no tickets sold, which is
Right.
maybe, but having a jam, like if you all are musicians, come to the jam that Brian and all the folks in the Kennedy Barn String Band have. Those things are not really tourism, but are
Right.
so important.
No,
But,
that's a great point.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you.
We've got a
Oh wow.
Fairmont
Thank
State
you.
gift basket
Oh my gosh,
for you.
I love it. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for being here. So we're going to take a few minutes to reset the room. So there's food and drink outside. So everybody can move outside. We will reset the room. And then once it's ready, we'll invite everybody back in for some square dancing.
Thank you. Thanks.